So quite a while back, I created a video talking about Ichika Kaneki, kind of going through the processes of what she could potentially be and how important she would be to the story if it ever were to continue, which I highly doubt. From that video, I seen a lot of you guys wanting me to talk about Kaneki's second child, and at the time, I didn't even really think about it like that. So I thought it was very interesting when I seen a lot of comments and kind of the semantics and specifics of Kaneki's second child, and what that child could actually potentially entail too. Before I go ahead and talk about Kaneki and Toga's second child, which is supposedly a boy, I do want to mention a very interesting dynamic between parents and their children. It's something that's kind of played throughout Tokyo Ghoul quite a bit, but not many people have talked about it. It doesn't necessarily even play a primary spotlight in the story. However, if you do notice it, it does actually build quite an interesting dynamic and contrast with a lot of overlapping characters. So Ishida likes to do this very niche thing every now and then with characters that have parents, right? He'll make it so incredibly, sometimes noticeable, but ultimately it seems so insufficient and so unimportant that you kind of completely bypass it. But if you haven't already noticed, a lot of characters, whether they're children or parents, are completely disconnected from one another in some way, shape or form. Really good example is Toka and Ayato and their parents. Obviously quite a tragic thing, and the death that kind of went on with Toka's mother and how their father kind of handled the situation and how out of control he went. Next one is Hinami and her mother, and another one is even Eto and Kuzan, her father, which obviously have a very odd relationship that doesn't necessarily put them closer to one another. When you kind of take in the entirety of the story, this contrasts really well, especially with our main character. All of these characters have a very sparsely relationship with their parents or a very bad experience with them. When you kind of relay that back to Kaneki as a child and the relationship he had with his parents, it's identical. His mother was extremely abusive, she overworked herself, and she ultimately died. His father left at quite a very young age, whether he died or just left in general, and it definitely helps mold and create the character we know as today. More importantly, with those other characters, it does also mold and shape them. Toga and Ayato, Eto losing her mother as well, and Hinami losing her mother. And this is rarely played upon. Hell, it's not realistically even talked about. I think this is pretty important when it comes to Kaneki's children, because I think I briefly mentioned the whole tragedy cycle and how it ultimately just continues over and over again. How for ghoul parents and having their children becomes a lot more of a protective thing. Obviously Kaneki and Toga want to protect their children at all costs, even if that means kind of sacrificing themselves, which I highly believe that they would do any chance they could get. I think the play on happy families in Tokyo Ghoul and Tokyo Ghoul Re is pretty important. When you kind of understand the dynamics for it, it's almost, dare I say, impossible to have a happy family as ghouls, as a majority of ghouls are completely subjugated, and even by the end of the story, ghouls aren't accepted into the reality of the human lifestyle or anything like that. They're still subjugated, they're still pushed back to the corner of Earth. We're not going to let you out of here. We still think some type of way about you, obviously because of your nature and what you do to survive. This creates a ripple effect, not only for these people, but also for their children. And then it becomes a malicious cycle of these parents teaching their children certain type of things and feeling certain type of ways. Ultimately, if it was any different, if ghouls were accepted to an extent into humanity and human lifestyle, you notice that the children of these ghouls would ultimately be different. They wouldn't grow up harboring any ill feelings towards humans or a different species or anything like that, because they themselves are no longer subjugated to that extent, right? There'd still be a bit of animosity there, but I think the overall reaction and general raising of a child would be a lot more happier. And it's a very vicious cycle and a hard one to break out of. Lucky enough, this is both good and bad for Kaneki and Toga's children, both Ichika and the second unnamed child, who ultimately enter a world where they're slowly kind of teetering on the border of joining hands with humans and working with them, but they also have the vicious backtailing of their father, Kaneki, who is someone that is extremely well known, most likely across the globe, and has done a lot of extremely bad things to affect it. Not only the world, but the ghoul society and the human society. This second child, I think, would definitely follow more closer suit with Kaneki, and I think it makes a lot of sense for the second child to also be a boy. It helps kind of balance out their characters. If Ichika was more attached to her father and the boy was more attached to their mother, obviously taking in general norms, display their affection and kind of balance out their power. Because there's no doubt in my mind that this second child would be so incredibly powerful. When when you think about the power dynamics of a family, right, this child is most likely on par with Kaneki and completely unbalances it entirely. Could you imagine what would happen if this second child found out what exactly Kaneki done, what exactly Dragon was, and how Kaneki changed from there? When this child realizes that he's almost the equivalent of that, because Kaneki had this child after the Dragon situation, he's not necessarily as unique as Ichika, but he's something else entirely. Most likely a full-blooded ghoul, and maybe even some pure-blooded Washu ghoul at that. A lot of people wanted to kind of come at me for this semantics of ghouls, kind of taking in real-life biology, but not actually kind of applying it correctly to Tokyo Ghoul and Tokyo Ghoul Re, as they kind of left out everything that Tokyo Ghoul and Tokyo Ghoul Re incorporate with terms of ghoul genetics and everything in between. Instead, they just wanted to kind of bolster in the reality of genetics in the real world. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm not a biology expert, however, I do also like to take into consideration Ishida's writing and how he actually handles things up to that point. Regardless whether you're for the, biological aspect for it or not, you believe that or you don't believe that, looking at Kaneki before Dragon, he was very unique. And having Ichika before, he was kind of morphed into that dragon structure and technically rewritten. And then having his second child after the Dragon situation. Kaneki himself went through a complete metamorphosis, a change that hasn't necessarily been explained, but it's something else entirely. His body has changed completely. He has organs human scientists haven't necessarily seen before. His abundance of RC cells and his usage of his Kagane is completely different to what it was and what we know of. It's unlike anything we've ever seen before, especially going up against Furuta, but more specifically Rize. Without a doubt, I believe this child has a very close connection to that, ultimately being born a full ghoul but having very, very strong RC cells that descend through Kaneki. Some that are very aggressive and some that ultimately could change what this second child could be. I do want to mention the effects that it had not only on Kaneki and Rize, but more specifically on Shikurai, another ghoul that only ate a portion of Dragon, and it changed him completely. Someone that's so unique to the story that we rarely even seen was completely changed and morphed into something else entirely from eating Dragon. That's how aggressive these RC cells are. They kind of cannibalize on the RC cells that originate in a ghoul's body and slowly start to take over and spread. They're very, very dominant. I really feel strongly about this child being something else like that. Not necessarily coming out crazy or trying to kill people or morph into something else entirely. I just think that his capabilities and the potential that this second child could have could be through the roof, on comparison with Ichika to any extent. Unlike any other ghoul that we've ever seen, they're both very unique in nature, but this also makes them very dangerous on two different aspects. One, they're dangerous because obviously the power that they hold may be untapped and Kaneki and Toka may not know how to deal with it. And two, society looking at these children and seeing them potentially as a massive threat. Such young children holding so much raw potential and power. Not only that, but another perspective is these children, especially the second child, looking at Kaneki and seeing himself in some sort of manner, and then finding out what Kaneki done as Dragon and how that kind of happened, and knowing that he is a byproduct of his father to that extent may drive him away from his own family, even Ichika to a certain extent, which is kind of looking at it from a rather dark perspective, but it also is one to highly consider if the story ever were to continue for whatever reason. I think with all the things that I've talked about just now, and then looking at the second child, I feel like a lot of you guys are probably starting to paint some sort of picture on what this child could potentially be like, how much untapped raw potential with Kaneki having this child after Dragon, how that would descend onto his child, how that would affect him in some way, shape or form. Hell, it may not even affect him at all, who knows? But I would like to believe that there is some sort of semantics there in place that doesn't necessarily make this second child a normal one. And I think the amount of RC cells and the type of RC cells that Kaneki holds and how that kind of traverses over to that second child would be extremely interesting. And the dynamics throughout the family would be completely warped and changed, and the family cycle that I talked about at the beginning of the video ultimately continued. It's very odd for families to exist in Tokyo Ghoul and Tokyo Ghoul Re. Kaneki himself is kind of the end all goal for that. Kind of what every ghoul wants, a loving, happy family where they can live in peace peace, potentially in a portion of society that accepts them. But if these children are too powerful that even Kaneki and Toka can't control, it completely changes that dynamic. It uproots all of that tragedy once again, and the cycle ultimately continues. With that being said, that is basically it. Let me know what you think about, Kaneki and Toka's second child. Do you think it's just going to be some sort of normal ghoul? There could be more potential there with this child taking place after Dragon Kaneki. Who knows? There's a lot of different questions, a lot of different ideas. We're probably never going to get answers for them, but the idea is interesting and I'm excited to see what you guys think. So with that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.